News just coming in. Russia-Ukraine war fears grow as Putin is going to send troops into Ukraine. The NATO has warned a full-scale attack on Ukraine. Ukraine has sent SOS to West for weapons. Just a few minutes ago, in fact, you heard from the European Union that has announced a fresh set of sanctions against Russia, and this involves, This in fact involves no access to the European economy. That was just being announced. In fact, some time from now, which is around 12:30 a.m. Indian Standard Time, we'll also hear from US President Joe Biden responding to what has been said by Russian President Vladimir Putin just some time ago, talking about how the approval has come in from the upper house when it comes to military invasion, in fact, against Ukraine. And that is something that option is pretty much on the table, is what was said by Russian President. Joining me now is Vijay Rana, senior journalist. He joined us from London. Your reaction to what was said by the European Union just a few minutes ago when the announcement came in, and that was pretty much expected, that there will be sanctions, and this is going to be in effect of blocking complete access to the European Union's economy, essentially, for Russia, which means Russia is going to be constrained in a big way. Mr. Rana.
Yes, they're trying to hurt Russia as hard as they can economically. And so European Union is the third major group since this morning who have spelled out their sanction plans. And according to some experts, that the sanctions announced so far can knock off at least 4 to 5% of Russian GDP, so which would be a substantial damage. But looking at what the game that Mr. Putin is playing, that he is demonstrating that he's in no yielding mood, and he wants to play tough and see the resolve of the Western Bloc. And let us see, in half an hour, Biden will be speaking from White House. Let us see what he does. At the moment, they have only one game at their hand, and to press Russia as hard as possible economically. But then this also gives an indication that they are in no mood to take a military confrontation with Russia, and that further emboldens the resolve of Mr. Putin. So it's a very, very kind of tough diplomatic or military game that is being played at the moment, and we don't know where it will end up.
Until the announcement that came in just some time ago from the Russian president, a while ago essentially, there was some amount of optimism that there will be de-escalation in at least few days to come. But I think a lot has changed after today's announcement, Mr. Rana.
Yes, exactly, because nobody expected, and remember, it was all started by Russia's sending, the kind of almost recognizing these two republics of Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk. So after that, West has to respond in some way or the other. So basically, the crisis is, the lead is taken by Mr. Putin at the moment, and he's just playing these games. Military option is always there, which nobody wants, and he perhaps knew that West has no option but to impose economic sanctions. Now, one has to see is that how much hurt he can take on economically. And it looks like they are in a pretty comfortable position. They have got enormous amount of gas and petroleum products, which West desperately needs. In fact, most of the European countries depend on Russian gas. And it will create a lot of difficulty for consumers who are already hard hit by the fuel prices in the West. There's a lot of unease. They don't want the petrol and gas prices to go up. And which will inevitably happen. So these sanctions will not only hurt Russia, but its rebound reflex will be that they will also hurt the common man on the street in the Western countries. People are already very uneasy. The food prices have gone up here in the West. The petrol and fuel prices have gone up. So it's a kind of it's a double whammy, basically. So you hurt Russia, Russia will hurt you back. and it's a no-win situation for either Russia or for the West.
Expecting, Mr. Rana, from President Biden's address, which is expected, in just about a few minutes from now, at about 11:30, is expected to speak. What are you expecting that to be about?
I think he will build on this sanctions story, and I don't think Biden will say anything. He will play tough, of course. He will say that America would retaliate if there is any military, full-scale military invasion of Ukraine. So I think he will like to play a tough game, and of course imposing more sanctions against Russia. Beyond that, I don't think he's in a position to do anything substantial at this moment. So it's a wait and watch game, and let us see who does what next and how to respond.
Okay.
So at the moment, it's very difficult to say where it will end up, but the game has begun, and it is the test of the resolve of both America and Russia. And Putin knows that Americans have fumbled in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And Putin also knows that American opinion is in no mood to take another war on their hand. So that is Putin's strength. And now let us see how, and Biden, by his looks and the way he talks, he betrays a kind of weakness of the Western Bloc at the moment. So, and that is what is the strength of Putin at this moment.
And that strength is something that he's not, hesitating to show at all. In fact, this last interaction shows Putin really muscle flexing much more than he was over the last few days. It's clear that as a world leader, he was also, waiting for things to shape up as far as the Western Europe, the NATO and the Biden administration is concerned. But all of those things that Vijay Rana has just mentioned are certainly things that have made and shaped Putin's, address. He's going to be obviously watching for what Joe Biden says in about 25 minutes from now. We're going to be live right through that speech here on India Today. We've got you covered on the biggest geopolitical standoff of the last decade. This is a big story. Only months after Afghanistan, we're seeing a massive military standoff now between the Western countries backing Ukraine and the big bear that is Russia. Their leader, Vladimir Putin, flexing muscle, breathing more fire. I'm not going to say breathing fire entirely, but breathing more fire than he has in the last few days. He's talking about missiles, he's talking about ranges, he's talking about nuclear capabilities potentially of Ukraine, he's talking about the sanctions, and let's also remember that the Ukrainian president has just asked for vastly more arms and ammunition from the Western powers because they also perhaps believe that invasion is now imminent. Well, as Russia steps up its offensive against Ukraine, or at least prepares for it, from the US and UK, sanctions to Germany, halting the Russia gas pipeline, Putin faces global consequences for the move. We get you the latest on these simmering tensions between Russia and Ukraine on the back of what President Putin has just said.
War clouds loom in Eastern Europe. On Monday, Russian President Vladimir Putin lay claim to all of Ukraine as a country created by Russia. Putin signed decrees recognizing the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, which were created after a separatist war in eastern Ukraine in 2014. The Russian president put the onus of bloodshed on Ukraine.
Statements of the U.S. leadership about the active confrontation military actions in the east of Ukraine would not stop Ukraine to join NATO if it will correspond to the criteria of the NATO Charter and if they can overcome corruption. And they try to convince us that NATO is a peaceful and defensive bloc. So there is no threat for Russia. And they, again, suggest we believe their words, but we already know the value of such words.
Ukraine has hit back saying Russia has ruined its territorial integrity.
We know that they ruined the international law. They did the Latin step. They ruined our territorial dignity, our sovereignty, and we're waiting for the official recognizing by the civilian world that they go out from the Minsk agreement. We're waiting for the Normandy format, that the leaders of the country will say us that it's true, and after that we will decide what we will do with the EU platform.
The US has hit back with sanctions against the Russian-aligned zones. The Joe Biden administration has signed an executive order that prohibits all new investments, trade and financing to the territories recognized by Russia.
Russia's clear attack on Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity is unprovoked. It is an attack on Ukraine's status as a UN member state. It violates a basic principle of international law. This move by President Putin is clearly the basis for Russia's attempt to create a pretext for a further invasion of Ukraine.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson called Russian action in Ukraine a pretext for a full-scale invasion, imposing sanctions on 5 key Russian banks and freezing assets of 3 Putin aides.
We will immediately institute a package of economic sanctions, which I think, as people would expect, targeted not just at entities in Donbass, in Lugansk and Donetsk, but in Russia itself, targeting Russian economic interests as hard as we can. I'll be setting out a bit later on in the House of Commons what we are going to do. This is, I should stress, just the first barrage of UK economic sanctions against Russia, because we expect, I'm afraid, that there is more Russian irrational behaviour to come. And the sad thing is that at every turn in this crisis, the UK's pessimistic predictions have been vindicated.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that the country has taken steps to halt the process of certifying the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline from Russia. Putin could face more global isolation. The European Union has repeatedly said it is ready to impose massive consequences on Russia's economy if it invades Ukraine. But it has also said that given the EU's close energy and trade ties to Russia, it wants to ratchet up sanctions in stages. Bureau Report, India Today.
And India Today's man on the ground in Ukraine, Gaurav Sawant, is live with me tonight. Gaurav, we've just heard President Vladimir Putin. A lot of muscle flexing has just happened. President Biden is going to be speaking in just about 20-25 minutes from now. What's the mood on the ground? You're headed towards the rebel-held areas of Ukraine. The Russian parliament has just cleared the use of military force and the sending of troops into the eastern parts of Ukraine. What are you hearing?
Shiv, that's the escalation that we are talking about, and that's the escalation that's actually being reported on ground, prompting us to reach that area. We are on board a Ukrainian train, and this is a journey that's going to last 14 hours by train, getting to the location that we want to get to, and then another 2 hours by road to get to the areas where the battle or the fighting is taking place. But reports that we've got seem to indicate that there has been a massive escalation in ceasefire violations and the kind of caliber of weapons that have been used. Shiv, initially it was being reported that small arms were being used, then it escalated to mortars, but as of now we are told 122 caliber weapons are also being used by both sides. Now, in one case, the Russians allege it's the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian army, from information that's filtering down, seems to indicate that it's not just the rebels backed by Russians, but the Russian forces that are engaged now. Of course, Shiv, you are well aware of the images that went absolutely viral about Russian tanks and armored personnel carriers and troops rolling into Donetsk, which is now a liberated territory or the Republic of Donetsk. So that indicates a major escalation from both sides. What will this brinkmanship lead to is the question that's on everyone's lips, Shiv.
The situation just got more volatile, Gaurav. You've just come back from Kharkiv. You are headed towards a place where the Russians are likely, or at least have been cleared to send in troops. These are areas which have been declared as independent states by President Putin, which is being interpreted as an invasion without troops by the West. All bets are off, Gaurav. Since you arrived there in Ukraine, you've been the only journalist broadcasting from both the frontline areas as well as the urban areas. In the time that you've been there, this game has completely changed.
It indeed has, Shiv. There's been a major escalation and the mood on ground, the pulse on ground, it's changed completely. Initially, it was felt that while there is a lot of saber rattling on from both sides, but ultimately dialogue will lead to resolution. But stances on both sides, they've hardened, and the fact that the Russian President Vladimir Putin took that big decision that Donetsk and Luhansk, or Lugansk as some call it, Luhansk and Donetsk have been declared as independent republic, People's Republic of Lugansk and Donetsk has resulted it's an absolute game changer in the sense that Russian troops now are no longer backing the rebels, but as peacekeepers, they're in these rebel-held territories, and it's not the entire province that the rebels hold. So now, perhaps in the days and weeks ahead, and God forbid, you may just be seeing pitched battles for the control of the entire territory. And this is extremely alarming should this happen, because in 2014, when Russia, took control of Crimea, it did not lead to the kind of escalation that the situation is leading to now, and the hardening of stance, Shiv. So you're absolutely right. All bets are off, and this train that we are on board right now, it's speeding towards that territory where the conflict is taking place, even as you and I speak, Shiv.
Gaurav is headed towards eastern Ukraine. Look at that map. Look at that map. That's where Gaurav is headed towards. He's based in Kiev right now. He's been there for the last many days. More than any other journalist, he's headed now towards the two places on those maps marked in orange, which are the rebel-held territories bordering Russia, which Russia has claimed as independent territories. And those are places which are the rebel territories, which consider themselves as separate from Ukraine. They're backed by Russia, and today Putin has bestowed on them independence, making this entire situation exponentially more volatile and more leaning towards the possibility of military power being used. Gaurav, in the last 3 hours since Vladimir Putin has spoken and, taken questions from the Russian media, this entire situation has gone from being one that was relatively benign, sensitive but relatively benign, with the real possibility of a diplomatic diplomatic way out, to the very real possibility that we're going to see boots on the ground and possibly even a kinetic shooting war.
Shiv, you could well see kinetic shooting war. When I put this question to people in Kiev this morning, they said the war has already started, with Russian troops rolling into Donetsk initially, and those images went viral, to the fact that Russian troops will now be coming into Lugansk, and the fact that in Kharkiv, where I was yesterday, Shiv, Kharkiv is the second largest city in Ukraine with a population of 1.5 million, barely 25 kilometers from the Russia-Ukraine border. And Shiv, the dynamics in this country change so much over several kilometers, because eastern Ukraine has a lot of love and sympathy and emotional attachment to Russia, and they're very open about it. They're very, very open about it. They talk about it. Whereas the West, where Kiev is, they are very, very pro Europe, NATO, and those, that equation. So battle lines are very clearly drawn even internally, and this is where now this conflict may just be taking place. So there are two aspects that become extremely crucial. One, Kharkiv could be targeted by Russia. 2, Russia has about 20 to 30,000 troops in Belarus, and should they choose to, they can just roll down. Of course, there are defenses. Ukraine has a standing army and a potent standing army, but can they stand up to Russia is the question. They have, of course, $500 million worth of Javelin missiles and a lot more American equipment that has been given in. Post 2014, you'd recall more than anyone else, Shiv, that they have $2.5 billion worth of American military hardware in this region. Will this lead to a kinetic shooting war beyond the rebel-held territories? Now remains to be seen, but could well be a real possibility.
Rajiv Pawar is also with us. I will go to Gaurav and Mr. Pawar in just a moment, but Rajiv Dogra is also with us. He's a former senior diplomat. He's with me live. He's going to give us a global perspective. Gaurav will have Okay, Gaurav has Rajesh Pawar with him, who is based in Ukraine. Gaurav, what does Rajesh Pawar think? He's with you. He's on that train as you're heading towards the rebel-held territories of Ukraine, the place where, troops from Russia might be crossing over the border and marching into. What is his perspective on what the Russian president has just said and what he's expecting President Joe Biden to say in about 15 minutes from now?
Rajesh, what is your assessment of the situation on ground in the territory where we are headed, especially after Russian President Vladimir Putin has been empowered to take action even beyond Russia's borders?
See, Gaurav, now, as we are reading now, as we are heading towards Mariupol, Russian parliament has authorized Putin to use military force outside the borders of Russia, which means now Putin is free and he is legally empowered by the Russian government to order any invasion of Ukraine, full-scale invasion of Ukraine outside Donbass region as well.
But do you see a full-scale invasion of Ukraine take place, and should that happen, where does it happen? Does it happen in the east near Kharkiv or in that Donbass region, or does it happen from Belarus towards Kiev?
See, it is anybody's guess. But as far as I think, next 3 to 4 days, Russian army will take time to stabilize itself, to dig up their defenses along the Ukrainian border. Beyond 3-4 days, anything can be expected this side. But I think Russia can surprise Ukraine really from holding defenses in Donbass and attacking from Belarus.
That was the point I was coming to. Shiv, as you well know, as Rajesh Pawar knows, all of you study military history very well. All of you study military strategy very well. Russia does what is not expected of Russia, and that is what military commanders do to achieve that element of surprise. Everyone expected Russia to attack either Kharkiv or Belarus or Kiev from Belarus, and he sent in his forces into Donetsk and Lugansk, while declaring them as independent republics, none of which was war-gamed by America, or was it?
See, I think the move to recognize Lugansk and Donetsk as independent countries has to do more with international law than with military strategy. Because once he has recognized them as independent countries, signed a treaty of friendship with them, and signed a treaty of military cooperation with them, now he is totally within international law to send his forces there. Had he not done that, that would have been a violation of international law. But when it comes to military, as you very rightly said, the element of surprise is the most important element in war. And here it is anybody's guess. Russia has the capability to strike from north, from Belarus, from east, from Russian territory, or from Donbass, and from south, from Crimea. So it can be from any direction.
The Black Sea region, again, the Russian Navy extremely strong. The fact, Shiv, you can tell us that better, the fact that SLBM, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, strategic forces, they carried out an exercise, intercontinental ballistic missiles. When these weapons or when strategic forces are used, what is the signal that goes out, Shiv? You tell our viewers, what is the messaging that huge muscle flexing that's happening from the Russian President Vladimir Putin.
At a time of such strategic sensitivity between two countries where we're talking about an invasion, Gaurav and Rajesh, and I want to tell you that India Today's team is headed towards the most volatile part of Ukraine right now. They're going to be reporting very sensitively on an issue that is developing on the hour. They're going to be with us live. They're on that train. As you can see, that on India Today, our reporters never sleep. This news never stops. They're headed to Ukraine, but they're live with me. This is not recorded. Gaurav is actually sitting there with Rajesh in that train, and they're headed towards Donetsk and Luhansk, which are the rebel-held territories of Ukraine. But Gaurav, to answer your question, and I'll get you also in on this, is that we haven't heard, there was one soundbite that President Putin had made a few weeks ago, where he talked about how NATO's muscle flexing could make this a nuclear issue. And that in itself had become an enormous news moment. It was projected as, Russia doing nuclear saber rattling and being irresponsible, in an already very volatile situation. Today, President Putin has taken that little news point and made it much bigger. He has directly talked about the ranges of missiles, the nuclear delivery systems. He has said that Russia and Moscow need to take this very seriously because of the possibility of nuclear weapons being in Ukraine, supplied by NATO and Western countries if this becomes a larger conflagration. So Gaurav, anyone who thinks that this is not business, is very, very wrong. Things have gone from being relatively benign to the president of one of the most powerful countries in this entire battlefield talking about nuclear weapons.
And this is where this becomes extremely sensitive, Shiv. Rajesh and I were discussing, and there was this officer I was speaking to this afternoon, and completely off the record. His point was, Russian President Vladimir Putin is being very clear. He does not want a nuclear power Ukraine in his backyard, backed by the United States of America and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. He does not want a security nightmare that India faces with Pakistan. Now, the way you may look at that situation is a different story. Whether that comparison is fair or foul is a different story. But it remains a fact that Russian President Vladimir Putin is taking steps to ensure that there isn't a nuclear-powered Ukraine backed by NATO, backed by 30 countries hostile to Russia in Russia's backyard.
Absolutely, Gaurav. You are absolutely right in this. And the Russian president had made it very clear that they do not want Ukraine to be a playground for NATO and for American forces, which is a Ukraine which is hostile to Russia. Russia will never allow this. And when we were talking about where Russia can invade from, I have a very interesting proposition. Maybe, it can happen, and it will be out of the box. Russia has multiple divisions of airborne troops. Yes. And considering the fact that a lot of people, especially in east and south of Ukraine, are sympathetic towards Russia, if they launch their airborne forces inside Ukraine, behind the front lines, believe me, there will be chaos in Ukraine, and it will take maybe not even weeks, it will take days before Ukraine falls.
And the second part of the story, as you very rightly pointed out, is one, Russia's airborne forces, Shiv, as you well know, extremely capable forces. They've delivered when needed to deliver. But apart from that, the sympathy that Russia enjoys in the eastern part of Ukraine is enormous. Cameraman Pavan Kumar and I were reporting extensively from Kharkiv in the past 3 days. And in Kharkiv, people very openly say that Ukraine and Russia are brothers. It's America, it's North Atlantic Treaty Organization countries that are creating fissures between brothers. Shiv, you heard the Russian President Vladimir Putin. He was also extremely clear that Russia and Ukraine share a history. Russia and Ukraine share a relationship, and that has been damaged with Ukraine under certain forces, as he put it, corrupt oligarchs. And strange that he should use this terminology, but the fact remains that these people are letting Ukraine become the playground of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And he cited multiple military exercises that North Atlantic Treaty Organization countries have carried out in Ukraine, that he said, we just will not permit, we will not have offensive weapons deployed in our backyard. So that is something that he will do everything that he can to ensure doesn't happen, Shiv.
Gaurav and Rajesh, stay with me. Really, very much value, what the both of you are bringing to this developing story, because you're on your way to Donetsk, and I can't think of two persons whose view on this developing story is more valuable. We're also joined by some of India's most respected experts. We have Brahma Chelani, a doyen of strategic affairs, who's with us on this late breaking story. Mr. Chelani, thank you very much for your time late this evening. Vijay Rana continues to be with us. But Mr. Chelani, I want your view, sir, your assessment of what we've heard President Vladimir Putin just say, and also what you're expecting to see happen next.
I expect this crisis to continue for months, maybe even for years, because it has the makings of a drawn-out and dangerous confrontation in which Ukraine is merely a pawn both for Russia and the US. But more fundamentally, the issue is not about Ukraine. The issue is about NATO's forward policy. The Americans have a doctrine known as the Monroe Doctrine that was formulated almost 200 years ago, which the US still enforces in its hemisphere. The doctrine is that the US will not allow any unfriendly state to emerge in its backyard. Yet, the US has expanded NATO to Russia's borders, and it has deployed offensive weapons and forces in the Baltics. And as far as Ukraine is concerned, ever since 2014, that is in the last 7.5 years, the US has poured $2.5 billion in arms and military aid to that country. So what Putin is saying, and in fact he has drawn a red line, which is that he doesn't want a hostile frontline foe in Ukraine, which is what the US is creating. The US is creating a kind of a Pakistan on Russia's southwestern borders, the way the US created Pakistan against India from the 1950s. As you recall, Pakistan was made a member of SEATO and sent to military alliances. It was heavily armed and became a frontline foe against India. So Putin is saying in very blunt terms that Russia will not allow the creation of a Pakistan on its southwestern borders. In fact, in his speech yesterday, he made it very clear that the US and NATO, and I'm quoting him, they have begun the shameless development, unquote, of the territory of Ukraine as a theater for use against Russia. So he doesn't want any hostile, militarized frontline state to emerge on Russia's borders. And that is his red line.
That's a red line that he's created. The picture you paint is an ominous one. This is a conflict that could continue for many, many months. It's easy to sort of expect very concrete things to happen over the next few days. There is, the questions are of whether there will be boots on the ground, whether there will be a shooting war. Brahma Chelani says this has all the makings of something that could last for much longer than people are expecting it to last. It's not going to be a sudden conflagration. Vijay Rana, the US president will be speaking in a short while from now. You've spoken about expectations from him. He will likely, paint a picture of additional sanctions at this point of time. In terms of next steps on the ground in eastern Ukraine and along the border, what do you expect to see happen? The Russian president has talked about parliament clearing the use of military force, the sending of troops into eastern Ukraine. What should the world expect to see on the ground?
Well, it's, at the moment, what I see is a cat and mouse game is happening. Russia has clearly set the limits that complete demilitarization of Ukraine as far as NATO is concerned. They are determined that NATO has no role in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Now, Biden has a very, very delicate task here. And Russia, on the other hand, is on offensive, as almost UK, US, and EU have conceded that the invasion has already begun, and Russia has already, eating into the territories of Ukraine. So the war has already begun, according to the West, and Russians are clearly saying that you have no role in as far as Ukraine is concerned. So the West has very little options left except, economic sanctions, and how far they can hurt and how far Russian can afford to have these sanctions against them. That is yet to be seen. But what I see is a long, dragging game, and Russia can tire out the West. And remember, there are countries like France who are not very keen on being tough on Russia. So they are also aware, Russians are also aware that there are some dissensions within the Western Front. So at the moment, Putin seems to have the upper hand, I can easily see.
Okay.
And they will try to drag the situation. They will try to play the cat and mouse game and test the resolve of Biden. And Biden's leadership is already at stake. He didn't come out with some glory in Afghanistan. And if this becomes another nightmare for him, his leadership will go down in American history as a failed presidency.
Okay.
So there's a lot at stake for America here. And Russia at the moment has the upper hand, which almost everybody can see.
Okay, so you're saying that Russia has the upper hand. Well, President Biden will be, addressing the world in a very short moment from now and taking questions from the American press. Those are live pictures of the White House at this point of time. That's a live feed we've got going for you. We'll cut straight to the US president as soon as he begins speaking. He's expected to speak in anywhere between the next 7 to 8 minutes. So we're on a countdown for that. All eyes will be on the president's speech. Our guests will continue to stay with us. Meanwhile, let me just play out for you once again the highlights of what President Vladimir Putin of Russia has just said an hour ago.
Regarding using the armed forces abroad, well, of course, we signed the treaties yesterday, and in these treaties, with both Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic, there are articles saying about us providing those republics help, including military help. As long as there is an ongoing conflict, by this decision, we are making it clear that if necessary, we intend to stand by our obligations.
Mr. Chelani, what are you expecting President Joe Biden to, talk about in this address? It's going to come just, about an hour and a half after President Putin has spoken. What are your expectations from it, sir?
Whom are you asking?
Mr. Chelani, to you, sir.
Sorry?
Yes, to you, sir. Mr. Chelani.
Is that addressed to me?
Yes, sir. To you. Mr. Brahma Chelani, that question was for you, sir, if you can hear me.
Okay. Well, President Biden is going to announce some sanctions against Moscow, that's for sure. That's the reason why he's holding this press conference. It may not be a press conference, it may be a statement. He might take a question or two after his announcement, but he's clearly going to announce some sanctions against Russia. The problem is that sanctions are the only weapon that the US has in the current crisis against Russia. A double paradox stands out. Biden has turned the Russian aggressive moves against Ukraine into a major international crisis. Yet, as you know, Biden has not uttered a word on a bigger military buildup by China along the Himalayas. That buildup threatens to unleash war on America's strategic partner, India. There's been no statement from the Biden administration condemning China's massing of troops along the Himalayas or even urging Beijing to withdraw its forces. And the second paradox Biden has deserted Ukraine to its fate by ruling out coming to that nation's direct defense. He has said that publicly. Yet, it is his administration that has been in the lead in sounding the drum beats of war. So basically, the Trump White House has very few options, and sanctions are the only option that they plan to use against Russia. Unfortunately for them, US-led sanctions are going to work to China's advantage. The most sanctions that the Western bloc impose on Russia, the greater the economic and strategic benefit for China, which is the main adversary of the United States. So in a way, they're going to be building up their own principal foe.
Interesting. In just minutes from now, President Biden will be taking the stage, and getting those messages directed at Russia. Lots of information likely, announcements likely on additional sanctions at this point of time. That's likely to be the main focus of what President Biden says. But the Russian president, late last night, recognized the separatists and the rebel states of eastern Ukraine as independent and is expected to send troops to Ukraine's breakaway territories. Life along the line of control, or line of contact as it's called in eastern Ukraine, is fraught among desertion, constant shelling and worry. Yet people live here in a hope for peace. Here's our report from the ground in an area which President Putin has declared as independent, something that's being interpreted by the West as an invasion already.
There is a line that is dividing what was supposed to be a single political entity. This is Ukraine and its line of divide, where the conflict has left life horribly caught in the resulting crossfire. Over the past couple of days, there has been a resumption of heavy shelling. The intensity of it has only firmed the cracks of a broken nation.
I feel bad that we lost so many lives at this war. There are so many broken souls. It's bad. As for them leaving, it doesn't matter. We won't be able to do anything about it. We won't be able to return them.
Whether you recognize it or not, it's already separated. What will be next? Maybe they will manage to agree and maybe not.
On the other side of the line of contact, Russian-backed separatists have been evacuating people. Some moved out of fear of war as the shelling intensified. Others left out of desperation. The story of abandonment being the same on either side.
After the evacuation was announced, the entire neighborhood moved out. You went out in the street and there were no people.
You don't sleep at night and can count around 50 abandoned houses, completely empty. Many more ruined not by the war, but by being abandoned.
The shelling gradually picked up. Everyone started to leave. In our building, I was practically the only one left. It felt scary to be alone with no one around, so I finally decided to leave.
Though the villages have nearly emptied out since the conflict began in 2014, not everybody is ready to up and leave. There are those who say they will stay and they will not give up and flee.
At
the moment, we do not need any additional help because I want to say that at the moment everything is stable. It can be said that the situation has not changed. God forbid. If it changes, we are ready to defend ourselves. We hope that our Ukrainian army will support and defend us.
In some villages like these along the line of contact, all is not lost in the hearts of its residents. And hope still seems to linger for a peaceful resolution.
People are tired. It has been 8 years of the war. There was a ceasefire and now the shootings have resumed. Why do we have a profession called diplomacy if we are talking with weapons? It has to be resolved. Even our aggressor or non-aggressor Putin says that every war and confrontation ends at a negotiation table.
The sound of shelling is a constant reminder of tensions in the region. It has become largely a part of life for the people here.
Дочка на Украине, сын в городе.
My daughter lives in Ukraine and my son is in the city. Of course, nobody can come here. But what can we do?
They have been shelling all day?
That's nothing. They're just shelling the Volvo factory. It's nothing to worry about.
Так что это не переживайте.
While world leaders look for solutions and guns face guns in belligerent righteousness, as the skies shell death from above, another invisible man-made line continues to extract life out of the living. This is Ukraine.
Also bringing in Geeta Mohan, Foreign Affairs Editor, into our coverage as we await the address by President Joe Biden of the United States. Geeta, any word that you're getting from the Indian Foreign Office, from the Russian embassy here, on what we're expecting to see next? We heard from the Russian Charge d'Affaires earlier today, the first interview since those words that came out from Russia. What are we seeing? What are we expecting to see happen next? Any word you're getting in from the government?
Well, none so far from the government, Shiv. We know that the Indian administration has been very keenly monitoring situation on the ground, not only because Russia and Ukraine both are important countries for India, but also because there are many Indian nationals, Shiv, who are still in Ukraine. There are only a few of them who have returned, and many Indian students who are still there, universities still working and functioning normally. None of them have gone online, and is the reason why medical students do not want to return. So, and the government of India has not announced evacuation because things had not gotten this bad or serious or critical, Shiv. And is the reason why students were not returning or were reluctant to return. So Indian government now watching very carefully, monitoring the situation, but also waiting to hear as to what President Biden is going to say, Shiv. I don't think, and I'll agree with Brahma Chalani over here, that there is going to be a call for war or specific action against Russia. The action certainly is going to be economic in nature. We might expect the kind of sanctions on Russian companies who are working in the military sphere, the military equipments and weapons sphere. So the fear over here in New Delhi could be whether if India could be hit hard because of the sanctions against Russia. That's one fear for India. But beyond the sanctions, I don't think the president is really going to announce severe military action against Russia, not just yet. We'll have to wait and see what happens in Donbass region in the coming days. If things get difficult, if we see Russian troops move forward and way within the Donbass region, then we'll see whether if the European Union or the NATO for that matter, or NATO is going to come to Ukraine's rescue. Also, more importantly over here, it is not just about the NATO taking action, it's about the kind of statements that have come from NATO and from the United States of America. Shiv, if I may just ask a question to Brahma Chalani here. Brahma, the fact that we've seen NATO say that they're going to stand behind Ukraine and stand with Ukraine, the United States of America has said the same. But when it comes to boots on the ground, after Afghanistan, doesn't seem like US is going to really go in. And they expect Ukraine to fight the war against a Russian army. The numbers really don't match up when you compare a Russian army to the Ukrainian army.
You're right, Geeta. NATO has no plan to directly come to Ukraine's defense, but NATO has been pouring lots of weapons into Ukraine. It has armed Ukraine with Stinger missiles, also with Javelin anti-tank missiles. So it expects the Ukrainian forces to wage a protracted guerrilla war against an invading Russian force. That's the NATO plan. Whether that plan will work, only time will tell, because we don't even know whether the Russians will actually invade the Ukrainian heartland, because what we have seen so far is an incremental approach of President Putin. Through an incremental approach, he is keeping the Western side on tenterhooks. The Americans don't know what his next move would look like. In fact, they have been caught by surprise even by his latest move of recognizing the two breakaway provinces and deciding to send Russian forces into those enclaves. They didn't expect that he would do that. They were expecting him to actually carry out a direct invasion of the Ukrainian heartland, with President Biden announcing even a date, February 16. That date came and went without any Russian invasion. And after that date went by, Biden said the Russian invasion is coming. The invasion he meant was an invasion of the Ukrainian heartland. Now, whether the Russians decide to carry out a frontal invasion remains to be seen. I expect that they would continue an incremental approach. They might even launch a cyber war against Kyiv to cripple the basic infrastructure in that country. There are so many different scenarios that are possible, short of a direct frontal invasion.
Well, it was a conundrum for President Putin, Shiv. When we were speaking, I was speaking to experts in Moscow, some friends, some very well connected to the political circle in Kremlin. It is not a popular decision within Moscow, within Russia itself, to have recognized these regions. But it seems like they think Putin has a plan in place and there was no way out. This was Putin's messaging to the West that we will do this, to send out a message that we are not going to back down, and that the idea or the issue of Ukraine joining the NATO is absolutely non-negotiable.
Absolutely. We're going to come to Biden himself and the cat and mouse game that's being played and how long it can actually continue. But just for a moment, I want to tell our viewers that India Today is the only channel that is headed all the way from Kiev. This is the capital city of Ukraine, that's Kiev. Our correspondents are now on a train headed from Kiev all the way to Donetsk. Luhansk and Donetsk are marked in orange. These are the two rebel states that have been deemed and declared independent by President Putin today. Russian troops and forces are massed all along the border here. So this is the rebel-held territory that is the most sensitive right now, where the Russian forces have been cleared by their parliament to come in if they need to. Ukraine itself is the country that is now looking for as much possible Western help as necessary, because at this point of time, the Ukrainian president has said we need many more arms and ammunition to actually fend off the possibility of a Russian invasion. So things are extremely sensitive right now. Things have escalated. Brahma Chelani, says that there are many more possibilities, other than a simple shooting war or a military invasion that Russia can actually exercise at this point of time. Geeta, the India's stand as far as the Russia-Ukraine crisis, has been spoken about and analyzed for the last 48 hours. Are we expecting India to say anything more tomorrow on what has happened today, the words of Vladimir Putin today and the expected words of Joe Biden?
Well, Shiv, it all depends on what happens in terms of the next couple of hours are going to be very critical. Let's wait and see what President Biden has to say. If it is an announcement of sanctions, India will then have to go back to the drawing board and see whether if it impacts Indian deals with Russian military agencies, companies, or even the government. That's the important area that India would be focusing on. Beyond that, in terms of the action situation on the ground and the kind of language that is being used, be it on the ground or verbally, between countries, the West and Russia, is something that India will continue to maintain a very measured, not just silence, but the statements that you'll see from India are also going to be quite measured, Shiv, because Russia indeed is important. We know a lot of people say Russia might be important, but what Russia is doing is not right. But the fact of the matter is that Russia is explaining why they're taking the kind of stand that they're taking. Brahma Chalani today morning had tweeted about the Monroe Doctrine, and that is critical, where America also ensures that neighbors around America do not ally with enemies. Over here, Russia's explanation is just that they want their security. But yes, Ukraine is a sovereign nation, and its sovereignty and integrity has to be respected. How far is Russia going to violate? India's reactions would depend most probably on those violations.
Welcoming on to our coverage as we await that address from the White House. Also with us is Lieutenant General Raj Kadian. He's a well-known security and defense expert and former Deputy Chief of the Indian Army. General Kadian, welcome. How are you seeing, what's playing out at this point of time in the context of what President Vladimir Putin has just said? He's talked about military force. Russia's parliament has cleared the use of, military force externally as well. How do you see this playing out, sir? We're awaiting word from the White House as well.
I think White House, the only weapon they have in the armory is the sanctions. They've already fired it. Maybe they can impose more sanctions. But Putin would have catered for it in his planning. He knows sanctions would come, and he would have been ready for it. Only thing that perhaps came a little too early and may not have been expected was the German response, that they will stop the construction of that Nord 2 line, because earlier Germany had been slightly ambivalent, and since their dependence is much more heavy on the Russian gas than of the other European countries, so perhaps even Putin might have hoped that Germans may not go wholeheartedly along with the American line of thinking. But Putin would have catered for it. I think he's already examining how to extend the gas line southwards to China. China needs gas. They have a big market for it. And Russia needs a point where he can export it. So how far they will go, that was your question. They have not yet reached the extent of the two new republics that Russia has declared. The Luhansk and the Donetsk, they were only in control of part of it. The rest of it was under Ukraine control. Now it is to be seen whether the Russian troops would advance further westward. So far they were helping only covertly. Now they are openly helping the two republics, new republics. So they might go logically, militarily. It makes sense that if you have declared those republics, you have gone inside to assist them, then you at least take the area which belongs to these two republics. At the moment, that is not the situation. There is a control line. Some area was under Ukrainian control. Some was under the control of these rebel forces, covertly assisted by India. So one presumes that militarily Putin can lose nothing more. The NATO, the East Shore and the world is sure NATO will not send boots on the ground. They will give all the assistance to Ukraine, ammunition, weapons, but boots on the ground, because if that happens, then it is a major conflagration which no country will be interested in. So they will keep assisting Ukraine. They will hope that Russia will get into the quagmire, something like that had happened in Afghanistan from 79 onwards. So they will want to exhaust Russia economically rather than send the people on the ground.
Okay, they would rather exhaust Russia economically than, make this a real military confrontation, of the kind that, perhaps many observers are expecting to see happen. The general sense, from our panel here today is that it's likely to be, a much broader, longer enduring conflict, than a simple simple boots on the ground, shooting war kind of thing. The live pictures of the White House there on the right-hand side of your screen. President Joe Biden expected to speak. He was expected to speak at about 11:30. Obviously that time isn't fixed right now, but I think it's pretty unanimous that President Biden's address in just a few minutes from now is likely to be about turning the screws as far as sanctions is concerned, on Russia to a greater extent. Many of the chess pieces have moved significantly in the last 48 to 72 hours from France to Germany, some of the other Western European countries, NATO, of course, the Ukraine presidency as well, the voices coming out of India and Russia, all of it playing into what is turning out to be a huge geopolitical spectacle. And all of this just months after the huge implosion that took place in Afghanistan. So, the world hasn't been able to catch its breath, and it's already been visited by this fresh face-off between Russia and the Western world backing Ukraine. We've got some breaking news coming in now. Okay, the US is seeking